I want to welcome you all to Hawaii. I welcome you tomorrow to the East-West Center itself, and I want to thank you for coming. And I know many of you, in fact everybody, received invitations at what we might say was a very late date, and so we're really grateful to everyone for joining us, to committing to not just this time, to your PowerPoint tomorrow, but also to written papers a little later on. I want to thank very much President Lee of KIEP as our co-sponsoring partner, and I want to thank Professor An, Se-Young An, who early on talked to me about the potential concept of this meeting. I'll say a little bit about just what I think we're trying to do. You might think that you come to Hawaii, you come to an island in the South Pacific. It looks very beautiful, there's lots of palms, so forth. But actually this is an island in the North Pacific. And if you want to go to Tahiti or to Fiji, you have to fly another 6 hours to the south. People often don't realize how far the distances are around the Pacific, but it's very distant. But I think if we think about the world in general, where the axis of power is, it really is in the North Pacific. China, Japan, the United States, the second, third, and first economic powers in the world. Canada, 15th or 12th, maybe Korea, 14th or 15th largest power. So very few countries really in the North Pacific, but an incredible proportion of the world's economic product coming from this region, and an incredible amount of trade that is occurring across the North Pacific, and also human interaction. And oddly enough, we've never thought about so much about regional cooperation in the North Pacific. We have Asia-Pacific cooperation, we have Southeast Asian cooperation, we have Inter-American cooperation, we have Northeast Asian, hopefully cooperation. But the North Pacific as a geographical region seems to be forgotten. And we're not trying to create a regional organization, but just recognizing the economic importance of these countries, their interactions with each other, and the importance, I think, of plurilateral dialogues, where it's more than bilateral, it's more than just a U.S.-China economic and strategic dialogue. But it isn't as large as the G20, the APEC, or the East Asia Summit. So I think it has a special place because it allows for more intimate dialogue, and yet it is not a bilateral dialogue. And so what we're trying to do is promote this idea in a region that is very important, and with partners that we think can have a great deal of discussion, and through that discussion enrich their understanding of some of the regional dynamic and the importance that this region has for global leadership. So the East-West Center has been cooperating with a number of institutes on North Pacific cooperation ideas. We have a conference coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks with the Korean Economic Energy Institute on the shale gas revolution in North America and how that will affect Northeast Asia. We have our 4th Arctic Conference in about a month's time. And that has been a very interesting dialogue between the 5 nations that have Arctic territory, and 3 of the major drivers of change and consumers of resources in the Arctic, namely China, Korea, and Japan. So with that, I will just say finally that we're covering an awful lot of territory in only one day. How we do 4 of the world's largest economies, macro economies, in an hour and a half, and then look at all these free trade agreements, and then look at North Korea. I'm just not sure how we'll do. But we had a very limited amount of time because we had certain people's schedules that we had to adjust to. And I'm hoping that this will just be a taste, and that after this taste we will realize that this is something that we should continue, and in a little longer period of time, both planning time and execution time in a future year. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Lee, the president of KIEP.
Great to be back. Some of my trips to Hawaii was much more difficult, as I was sharing with my colleagues over lunch, but that's for another time. Let me just tell you briefly my experience on my way from the airport to the hotel. The driver who claimed to have lived in Hawaii for most of his life told me that he has never been as much confused as he has been for the last couple of years. And he also said even the wind that used to blow from north to south now blows from east to west. I don't know whether that's true or not, but anyway, but he was happy today because the wind somehow, for whatever reason, changed again, just for today, from north to south. But that nevertheless didn't alleviate his confusion. So I asked him, why? What's so confusing about everything? Is it the weather or what? Then he started to elaborate. And soon I realized what mistake I had actually made, because by the time I was stepping out of the taxi, I was also very confused. He was essentially confused about the global political situation. He couldn't understand why some certain countries were behaving the way that they behaved. And he truly wanted to call some of them out, to the effect that the FBI actually stopped him. So he was a real action man. Anyway, I was happy that he didn't touch on economic issues, because if he had, he would most likely have also revealed my confusion about the global economy. But rest assured, I'm not going to give you a presentation of my version of the global economy, because for that purpose we have lined up excellent speakers for tomorrow for 1.5 hours to alleviate some of Charles' concerns. I'm sure we can cover a lot, but not very much depth. But anyway, today what I'd like to share is a few of my thoughts of how I sort of see the things in Northeast Asia and Europe, US. So I was recently in Russia, that's why I'm referring to Europe. If you look at the global economic structure, we used to be operating under a two-pillar system where it was essentially the United States and Europe. Now we have shifted to a three-pillar system where we have Northeast Asia, we have the US and Europe, with broadly put together equal size. By Northeast Asia, I mean actually China, Japan, Korea. Of course, these have also different sizes, but essentially that's what it is now. And put them together, you have about 90% of global GDP. Within that sort of pillar, we have, just looking at China, Japan, and Korea, and the United States, they account for a large share as well. But the synergy that we used to get from economic cooperation recently have waned, and that's not because of economic reasons. Well, there are some economic reasons that's actually common around the globe, but more recently it was more political. So that's a shame, because there's a lot to be gained, particularly given the current size even is similar to the three country sizes put together is similar to the countries put together in Europe, the European Union. But if you compare the level of development, Asian countries on average are still below that of the European countries. So there's a lot of potential to be made in going up the scale. And once Asia does that, then Asia would become a much larger bloc. And of course, the United States, well, as a single country, is already the largest anyway. So if the United States and Northeast Asia collaborates and continues its economic cooperation for mutual benefit, there's a lot to be gained. And here is what some of the economists actually can do, is to clarify to the general public what gains can be made actually by continuing collaboration. And hopefully the taxi driver today was not the only one, but maybe there are many people like that. And if you can emphasize and clarify the real economic gains to be made by further cooperation. Maybe we can convince some of the politicians to shift their emphasis more on focusing on how we can actually achieve Pareto gains, because I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Maybe there might be some short-term losses, but if we all work together, we can actually achieve a Pareto gain in economic cooperation. And then over the long run, that would actually benefit everyone. That's sort of is my first point. The second point is, in Asia, usually what happens in the region is you need stability among or between the largest parties. Once this stability is shaped, then the smaller countries evolve around this evolving equilibrium, so to speak, in order to maintain security and peace. In Asia, we have more than that, and that is we have North Korea, which is an additional factor that we would like to all address somehow. Even though in terms of its size, it's relatively small, but we should not undermine its potential negative spillovers that the country can exert. So in that regard, in order to ensure the economic cooperation that I was referring to earlier, I think we need to establish some form of security where we can jointly work together to provide a platform in which North Korea can enter and start playing according to the games, rule of the game, so to speak, that everybody can understand. Once we have that, we will be able to achieve something that probably the European colleagues were able to achieve already a couple of decades ago. So in Asia, therefore, we have two challenges. One is to establish a stable equilibrium among the large players. Asia means Northeast Asia plus United States, of course. The second challenge is, okay, how do we ensure that the tail doesn't wag the dog? And for that, we need to provide a stable platform where they can actually enter. So with this, I'd like to, if I finish, thank Charles for making such an excellent arrangement here. And also everybody who came from near and far. Look very much forward to listening to your views and analysis tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay, I also have the honor to introduce to you Dr. An, who is the chairman of, actually I forgot the official English name, but it's the umbrella of all government think tanks. What's the Research
Council, yes.
Policy Council. Yeah, I don't think Dr. An will ever forgive me for not knowing the English official name. But anyway, he's actually in charge of supervising all the government think tanks. I think 23 in all. And I have the honor today to introduce him. Dr. An.
Dear President Charles Morrison, MA First Professor Kim Se-won, and Professor Wang Yu-jiang, Dr. Marcus Noland, and Professor Toko Iwasako, and the distinguished scholars and guests. It is my great honor to be here to make a welcoming remark at International Conference on Strengthening North Pacific Cooperation. Hawaii is 4,800 miles away from Washington, D.C., and 4,500 miles away from Seoul, and 3,900 miles from Tokyo, and 4,700 miles from Beijing. That is one of the important reasons why we, scholars, opinion leaders coming from the United States, China, Japan, and Korea are here to discuss and exchange our ideas on strengthening North Pacific cooperation. When we are looking at what is happening in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly among China, Japan, and Korea, we are able to find the rapidly changing economic and geopolitical landscape in this region. As all of you are aware of, traditional geopolitical framework was a bilateral match. United States, Japan, Korea on one side, and China, North Korea on the other side. Early part of this month, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Seoul. It was the first visit to Seoul after he took office as Chinese leaders. Even before visiting Pyongyang, North Korea, I think it is to increase influence on the Korean Peninsula vis-à-vis United States. Korea, as one of the strong allies of the United States, is now faced with the growing challenge of the competing head-to-head diplomacy between United States and China. President Xi Jinping and President Park also jointly announced that the ongoing China-Korea FTA deal will be signed by the end of this year. Just 10 days after his visit in Seoul, China and Korea had held round of FTA deal in Daegu, Korea, and make very, very remarkable progress. They agreed on a very, very hot issue of service market opening and investment liberalization. When it comes to Korea's relationship with Japan, historical territorial issues are creating tensions and conflicts. Also, there are such kind of prevailing distrust and tension between Japan and China due to similar regions. When I was talking with opinion leaders in Washington, D.C., they told me that the United States welcomed the strength relationship between China and Korea, but U.S. was very concerned about the worsening relationship between Japan and Korea, as well as mounting tensions between China and Japan. This kind of distrust and tension among China, Japan, and Korea is a serious threatening peace, prosperity in this region. President Park Geun-hye called it paradox in Asia. Paradox in Asia means that the disconnect between growing economic interdependence on one hand and the backward political security cooperation on the other hand. In this background, President Park Geun-hye proposed an initiative for peace and cooperation in Northeast Asia. This is planned to transform Northeast Asia into a place of trust and cooperation. At this critical time, in this very beautiful and peaceful honor, we should open our mind to discuss and exchange our ideas to dismantle prevailing tensions and distrust, and to make great effort to create a new vision and dream, aiming for peace, prosperity, and cooperation in this region. In this sense, Hawaii is an iconic place that enables Asia-Pacific countries to recover a sense of common identity and prosperity. One of the most important steps we have to do now is to advance an agenda for economic integration, such as Trans-Pacific Partnership, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, despite prevailing political tension and conflict in this region. In this regard, all of us from United States, Japan, China, and Korea should become founding fathers of North Pacific Economic Community, just like Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, France, and Gasperi, Spinelli, Italy, Holstein, Germany, and Paul Harris Stark, Belgium, did in Europe. Before wrapping up my speech, I'd like to extend my special gratitude to all of you again for taking your precious time despite busy schedule. My special thanks to President Charles Morrison and East-West Center staff members for hard work in making this meaningful event happen. And I would like to extend my appreciation to President Yi Leung of KIEP and all other KIEP staff members. It is my sincere hope that this conference will serve as an important opportunity for us to provide a new momentum to advancing North Pacific cooperation. Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Ahn for his inspiring remarks. And in fact, we do feel Hawaii is a wonderful place to have these kinds of meetings, partly because, as he said, it's so far from any national capital. It's easy to mix and treat each other with the on an equal basis, whereas most national capitals are kind of a conventional view of how the world looks from that national capital. And secondly, if you look at the faces of the people of Hawaii, you realize that this is itself an Asia-Pacific community. We once thought we had Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Caucasian Americans, Japanese Americans, Polynesian Americans, but now 70% of the people here are mixtures of one sort or another. With that, I'd like to introduce for our keynote speech Kim, one of Korea's most distinguished senior economists. Thank you, Dr. Chairman.
Thank you, President Nelson, for this kind introduction. Good evening. The title of my speech is Can Mega FTAs be the best alternative to advancing global trade liberalization? And I shan't copy my speech for the distribution.
To distribute it later.
Yeah, later. Okay, thank you. Dr. Jones in Boston, President of Peace President, Dr. Young Lee, President of KIEP, Dr. Seyong An, Chairman of NRCS, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to give you the keynote speech for this conference co-organized by KIEP and Peace President. This is also a precious opportunity for me to discuss with you this English exposed in international economics in such a prestigious, friendly, and especially a beautiful place. Taking this occasion, I would like to talk about how the two main pillars of international trade order, multilateralism and regionalism, have changed over the last half century, and where regionalism in the Asia-Pacific region should go in the future. After the World War II, GATT was the only de facto international trade international system governing world trade order. In reality, the U.S. exerted overwhelming influence on international trade relations and pursued an ideal of trade liberalization through multilateral negotiations based on non-discrimination principle. European countries joined this trade order as well, sharing similar standpoint with the U.S. while initiating their own regionalism represented by the European Economic Community, the former body of the European Union. Dear my fellow colleagues, recently witnessing the launch of talks for transatlantic trade and investment partnership TTIP between the US and the EU, I ruminated on the saying, history repeats itself, but that all was with the same futures. As far as I can remember correctly, it was just 50 years ago, that the handed down the multilateral trade negotiations on the framework GATT started. It was the largest multilateral negotiation within the framework of the GATT until that time. Relying on the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, President Kennedy suggested a linear tariff cut by 50% for industrial products in general and a substantial Atlantic free trade area between the two continents in particular. Those ambitious suggestions were completely in line with the GATT's basic principles such as multilateralism and the main suppliers rule. However, the grand design of Kennedy for an Atlantic free trade area could not make any progress because the UK's accession negotiation under the way at the time founded, and thus his idea withered to simple large-scale multilateral talks. Today, the international trade order has changed a lot compared to the time of Kennedy round. First of all, TTIP, which aims to establish a large-scale free trade area between the two continents, US and EU, is grounded on the waiver clause of the GATT, of WTO GATT. It is needless to say that this intention is not in line with the WTO's general principle and contrasts to the Kennedy's idea. In a way, the US seems to have accepted since the 1990s the EU's stance in which regionalism is regarded as a stepping stone to multilateralism. The EU, European Union, has concluded a number of preferential trade agreements, PTAs, mostly with developing countries, while it has maintained its trade relation with developed countries in multilateral framework. It is only in early 2013 that the EU started negotiating FTAs with Japan and later the US. The regionalism based on expanding FTAs became mainstream of international trade order in practice. The issue we have to pay our attention to is how to manage regionalism to make a shortcut to complement multilateralism or world trade liberalization forward. This is also what the second best theories suggest indirectly. It is therefore to work out an alternative to expand the so-called Davos flux. It is true that FTA policy has many advantages as a pragmatic way for WTO plus. However, the issue of rules of origin, ROO, especially remains as the Achilles heel of FTAs. At the time of 2014, most of 600 RTAs notified to the WTO take the form of FTA, and their intertwined different rules of origin sketch a complicated global FTA map. Under these circumstances, it is required to prepare proper alternatives to minimize negative effects such as trade diversion and trade transaction or administrative costs. Most of all, those different rules of origin should be adjusted to each other at the global level of to standardize the regulations in a more simple and less limited way. Secondly, in the past, tariff was used to be the main trade barrier that caused distortions in international trade, but now non-tariff barriers of various forms take its place. Unfortunately, even the WTO does not seem to have seriously reviewed non-tariff barriers in a systemic way, and it has difficulties in reducing them. In many cases, non-tariff barriers take the form of domestic regulations, and some other cases need harmonization or approximation of domestic rules, standards, and practices among negotiating countries to liberalize domestic markets. With these six scopes, for example, the TTIP between the US and the European Union negotiation focuses mainly on removing non-tariff barriers which affect bilateral trade in goods, services, and also opening for the public procurement market. According to some estimation by the EU, if the negotiations on non-tariff barriers succeeded as currently scheduled, the expected gain would amount to over 80% of total expected gains. The two main themes of today's conference, Regional Conference Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP and Trans-Pacific Partnership TPP, are contrary to the TTIP in several aspects. Among others, unlike the TTIP negotiations with similar economies like the US and the EU, the two multilateral negotiations led by Asia-Pacific countries include heterogeneous economies. Obviously, each of these countries presents great differences in economic system and development level. Policy preferences and priorities are also quite different. These apparent differences seem to inevitably become a barrier to the negotiations among the parties concerned. Thirdly, among big changes in international trade order for last 5 decades is that the central poles of international trade have been moving. Until the 1980s, when the world round was underway, we were used to the fact that the world economy was largely backed up by the two main pillars, the US and the EU, while Japan enjoyed its status as the third largest economy in the world. However, in the 1910s, China achieving a rapid economic growth has become a major economic bloc along with the US. Northeast Asian area centered on China, Japan, and Korea has risen as a new world growth pole. According to the statistics in 2013, these three countries account for 21.5% of the world GDP and 18% of the international trade. If we include Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other ASEAN countries, the number will be much higher. Most of these East Asian countries have been pursuing the FTAs in a very active way. In this context, it is obvious that the dynamic change in the global trade order is taking place along with East Asia. My fellow scholars, there have been countless FTAs concluded so far over the world, and TTIP, RCEP, and TPP negotiations are only at an early stage. However, once we could make these negotiations successful, it would have the largest effect on international trade order more than ever before. In a certain way, it would herald the fundamental upheaval in the world economy. Today, what I want to stress is that even if these negotiations are to turn out fruitful in the end, we have to take a careful approach to them, especially considering the two following points. One thing is that these negotiations based on FTAs should comply with fundamental preconditions in order to be sustainable. As you are already well aware, among the countless FTAs concluded so far, you could find only a very limited number of successful cases in Europe and North America. The rest of them are vanished or still remain simply as preferential areas, not fulfilling their initial aims. That is, I think, because most of the FTAs stuck to short-term economic benefits. For example, market access for certain products in instrumental perspective, or focused on the purpose of diplomatic strategy. FTAs, by definition, to the first step to market integration, and therefore it should be developed into a deeper form of market integration among member countries. By virtue of its very nature, FTA cannot remain status quo without further development. In the long run, a well-designed FTAs can be a starting point leading to a vision of common stability and prosperity among the participating members. Another thing I want to emphasize here is that an FTA needs to have a blueprint for contributing to the spirit of WTO, multilateral international trade liberalization. As already mentioned, the expansion of recent ongoing multi-FTAs, mega FTAs, could bring an unprecedentedly serious distortions in international trade, resulting in a greater havoc than ever before. Given that, from now on, there should be consultations within WTO to prepare alternatives with the purpose to minimize any damage of such distortions and adjust the agreements to comply with the ideal of multilateralism following the progress of the negotiations of multilateral FTAs. Finally, US is participating in the TTIP negotiation with Europe as well as in the TPP negotiation with Asia Pacific countries at the same time. This means that US could act as a mediator for international trade liberalization between the three continents and will be better positioned in terms of leadership. Of course, if the US government shows a vision for new global trade architecture. I could not emphasize enough on the US incomparable role and mission with their traditional enthusiasm for multilateralism. I do not think it is a coincidence that this meeting to discuss global trade global trade order based on TPP is hosted by Hawaii, which is a connecting point of Asia and America. I expect that the world-renowned experts participating in this conference could suggest convincing alternatives for reinvigorating global trade system. I see that now it's time for dinner. I wish you a bon appetit. Thank you for listening.